Realtors, and welcome to this special edition of the SCR Update. As always, I'm your host, Nick Kremydas, CEO of the South Carolina Realtors, and today we have a special guest with us. The South Carolina economy over the last 10 years has experienced explosive growth, tremendous opportunities to create jobs. Jobs create need for housing, and we're always looking at that data. Where are we? Where are we going next? So that you can plan for your business, you can plan for your future growth in your market. And today we have one of the state's premier experts when it comes to analyzing that data, analyzing what it means to the economy, and more specifically to our profession, to real estate. Please help me welcome Dr. Joy von Nessen. Joy is a research economist in the Division of Research at the Darla Moore School of Business at USC. Go Gamecocks. Welcome, Joy.
Thank you.
Did you get your Nike Gamecock gear today? It just came out.
Well, it didn't come in the mail yet, so
gotcha.
I'll have to get it when I get home.
I went online. I've got my new Nike Gamecock t-shirts coming. I can't wait to sport that Gamecock pride. And Joy's actually wearing purple. I thought he was wearing purple today, Mike, because he was supporting the Realtor Party. But he's a Furman grad, is that right?
I am. I'm a Furman grad. I always say I'm one of the few USC grads who also can get away with wearing purple.
There you go.
Yes.
No, well, we love purple here, right? It's a big part of what we do on the advocacy side. But today we're going to focus on economic data. Joy specializes in these regional economic forecasting, I should say, and does a deep dive on housing. He regularly conducts a wide variety of economic impact analyses, feasibility studies, and independent market research projects for clients in both the public and private sector. Joy has been a partner of the Realtors now for many years, and I know he's heavily invested in the real estate sector, and we're so pleased to have him with us today. So Joy, welcome. Thank you for being with us. I know that you have spent the last couple of months looking at our current economic data, and I know you've prepared kind of a mid-year report. What can you tell us about the data that you've just released? And Mike, we'll make sure we've got a link to the report in the comments. This will be shared with all of our members here in the next communication, but we're fortunate to have Joy here with us today to give us an overview. So Joy, why don't you just dive right in?
Sounds great. Well, there are two different pieces we can talk about. The first being looking at a broad view and impact assessment of the housing industry on South Carolina. And that was really the core of this most recent research that we've been engaged in, looking at the impact across South Carolina, because the housing industry, as we all know, is one of South Carolina's most important, particularly given the strong population growth trends that we are seeing. More people are moving in, and they need access to housing and a strong and vibrant housing market. So we wanted to take a look at that to see what is the size of the housing market and how is it changing over time. And when we do that, we start with a basic definition of the housing industry. A lot of people often associate the housing industry, that's a broad term, right, but mainly being about construction. And that's certainly an important component of it, but it turns out that is less than 50% of the housing industry as a whole. We have to look more broadly at the real estate sector as well, and all of the different types of professions that go into supporting not only the construction itself, but the process of buying and selling a home, the process of maintaining a home. All of that counts as part of the real estate industry as well. And so that's not just agents, but banking, finance, legal services, inspector services, home ownership, association employees. So all of those different sectors also tie in back to the housing industry. And so this is a big economic footprint in South Carolina.
What is the actual impact? How big is it?
Well, when we put it all together and you look at all of those elements, it turns out that housing generates about a $77 billion annual economic impact in South Carolina, which supports almost 280,000 jobs. So a really staggering impact there. And to put that in perspective, that represents almost 1/5 of the South Carolina economy. About 17% of GDP, of our state's GDP, comes from the housing industry. And that incorporates all of those elements that we're talking about.
What does that mean for our realtor members? How do we put that big number, $77 billion, in these days when we hear the media talking about these huge national deficits, these numbers just seem unreal. How do we translate that $77 billion into information that a local realtor can use?
I think for local realtors, what they really need to recognize is how important they are to their local economies and to the state's economy, and to communicate that as proactively as they can. So if we have a housing industry that represents 17% of our total economy in South Carolina, and we also find in this study that about 9 in 10 home buyers are using real estate agents to facilitate their home buying experience. So basically what that means is that when you look at the realtor community, they are essentially facilitating about 1/5 of the state's economy on an annual basis. So they are incredibly important to our state, to the future of our state, and to improving the quality of life and building on the great momentum that South Carolina has achieved economically over the past decade.
So realtors, this data is proof positive of the impact that you, your profession, our industry have on your local community. So when let's in practical terms, when a local community, we've been dealing all across the state with NIMBYism, this anti-growth sentiment that has just been pervasive. No one likes sitting in traffic. No one likes sending their kids to overcrowded schools. And oftentimes, local government's reaction to this public outcry, these public concerns, are to impose moratoriums or, as we've seen in the upstate, large minimum lot sizes of an acre or even 5 acres in one instance. We need this data to show our local officials that you can't kill the goose that laid the golden egg. And when you throttle the real estate market, it has repercussions across the whole economy. And that's one of the messages, one of my takeaways from the report is that our profession, our industry, real estate, is too important to South Carolina's economy to put it on a back burner. Now, as you mentioned, Joy, real estate's one segment, a large segment, but just one segment of the economy. As we look ahead, we're already looking ahead to 2027, right? We will have a new governor in place. If y'all, realtors, I know y'all have been watching the debates and getting to know all the candidates. All of them were talking about housing affordability and what housing means to South Carolina. What are your expectations, Joy, as we go into the second half of the year, and what can our members expect the economy to look like in 2027?
Well, let's start with the short run focus on 2027 and looking over the next 9 to 12 months. Right now, we all know that we're going through a period of economic uncertainty that has emerged over the last year or so, largely due to the back and forth on tariff and trade policy and what's been going on in the Middle East in 2026. And so that has reduced our overall growth at the national level over the last year. We're still moving in a positive direction, but not quite as strong as we had been in 2025. But having said that, as we look ahead to the second half of the year, still see significant demand drivers that are very positive for the housing industry in particular and for South Carolina's economy more generally. The biggest one being population growth. We were number 1 in the country. A lot of people don't realize that. Number 1 in the country among all states in terms of our population growth rate in 2025, so based on the latest data that we have. And we've been consistently in the top 5 throughout the 2020s. In addition to that, our employment growth has remained strong and stable in South Carolina, and it's actually improved somewhat in 2026, coming off of a pullback in 2025. So we look at both of those, what we call demand tailwinds, especially for the housing industry, employment growth and population growth, which are the biggest drivers of demand for housing. But we also have to balance that against the major headwind, which is inflation. Everybody sees the cost of goods going up, everything from groceries to when you're buying things on Amazon, and because energy prices have gone up this year because of what's been going on in the Middle East, that has further eroded the purchasing power of South Carolinians. So you have tailwinds in the form of strong employment and population growth balanced against these headwinds of inflation. And so the net effect, given that they're battling one another, is that we're likely to see fairly slow but positive growth for the housing industry as we move forward towards 2027. So we're cautiously optimistic, but we're not expecting any major acceleration of growth in the second half of the year.
You know, over my career, realtors, I've always found that in periods of growth where we've had this acceleration happen in our local economy here in South Carolina, that's always been accompanied by this rise in NIMBYism, the anti-growth sentiment, and recessions seem to wipe those concerns away. You know, I've always said a good recession will always take care of NIMBYism. And now, let's knock on wood here. I'm not wishing or hoping for a recession.
We're not seeing a recession.
But that was going to be my question. What do you see on that front?
Yeah, fortunately, we do not see a recession on the horizon. As I mentioned, more slow growth but positive growth in the second half of the year for the housing industry. And overall, consumer spending has been fairly resilient. We continue to see a job market, as I mentioned, that has held up fairly well so far in 2026. And we are seeing oil prices coming back down now in early July. Now, of course, that's hard to predict in terms of what's going to happen in the Middle East. But assuming that we do see oil prices stay at their current level, we are optimistic about the second half of the year, meaning that we'll continue to see positive growth. So no recession currently on the horizon.
That's good news. And realtors, I think my takeaway from this is the message again that we send back to our local elected officials. South Carolina is resilient when it comes to the changes that are happening nationally in our economy. Mike, if we can make sure we include a link to our national economist, Dr. Yoon's residential report that he put out just a few weeks ago, that highlights exactly what Joy's been talking about, the job growth, the stability, the price appreciation that we continue to see in South Carolina, generally outperforming literally almost every other state in the country, which hasn't always been the case. And one of the reasons that we are so attractive, such a popular destination for families that are coming, individuals that are coming to South Carolina, is our quality of life, and that it covers a wide range of factors. A lot of the NIMBY, I hate to keep focusing on NIMBY and anti-development, but that seems to be the theme this year. But that is a common theme that we want to protect quality of life in South Carolina. We don't want to become an Atlanta or Charlotte and have to deal with those traffic issues and whatnot. But I think there's room to do both. But the message to our elected officials is that we have to work together to manage the growth properly, because I think we can be a successful growing state and at the same time address infrastructure, schools, and healthcare and all the other issues that are on that I know are on the horizon. So one issue that, Joy, that's been on top of mind all the way from, Congress has, just put this monumental housing bill on the president's desk. Realtors, we've been in touch with our national lobby team. They tell us that this housing bill will become law one way or the other. And it might take the full 10 days of sitting there to become. If the president doesn't sign a bill that's put on his desk, it becomes law without his signature in 10 days. Of course, he could veto it, or of course sign it within those 10 days. Our NAR team tells us that it will become law with his signature or without, but it's very unlikely he would veto such a popular bipartisan bill. But affordability has been on the top of mind of our elected officials, certainly our realtor members, and it's a challenge for many South Carolinians. The latest data we saw shows that first-time home buyers are now almost 40 years old. Median price of a home in South Carolina is now over $400,000. Let's talk about some of these affordability challenges, Joy. do we see anything in the short run that could help improve that picture, or in the long run, do you see anything in the next few years ahead that could change that outcome?
So in the short run, unfortunately, the answer to that is no. We are continuing to see positive growth moving forward. We are not seeing as much price appreciation as we have been. In other words, prices are continuing to appreciate, but more at pre-pandemic levels, more at historic norms, which is actually a good thing. We want to see prices continue to rise, but not at these extraordinary rates that have been happening in recent years. So we're getting back to a more pre-pandemic norm in terms of growth in the housing industry as a whole, which is a good thing. But to your point, that doesn't address affordability. I think as we look over the next several years and even further out, the one thing we have to recognize is that there is a major imbalance between supply and demand. And any effort to address affordability in the long run in South Carolina or across the U.S., but especially in high growth states like South Carolina, has to be to increase the housing supply, the supply of housing. And that depends on the region that we're looking at in terms of the price points where we see the biggest shortages. But it really comes down to a major imbalance between supply and demand. We can talk about the last 10 to 15 years in terms of how we got here, but at the end of the day, that's really what we have to focus on if we want to improve affordability in the long run.
Yeah, the starter home has become almost an impossible find in the marketplace. And when you look at, whether it's all the associated fees, the regulations, the home builders have a good report that show just how much of a price of a home is factored into as part of just kind of the regulatory process. Mm-hmm. And I think in South Carolina, we need to take a cue from what Congress is doing to address these regulatory burdens, look at areas that we can create the supply in the segments that are needed in our communities, and provide those housing choices for South Carolinians in the future. I want my children to be able to buy a home in South Carolina.
Yes.
Yes. I want them to live and grow up and play and work in the same communities that I've lived in, and that is becoming harder and harder and harder. Interest rates have not come down as we expected them to, or at least were projected to. Do you see anything in the second half of the year? The Fed has said we're not really going to move on rates. Do you see anything changing there?
At this point, no. I think we could see a marginal decrease in mortgage interest rates between the end of the year. I don't think it'll be significant, mainly because inflation remains elevated. And when we look at mortgage interest rates, if you think about rates from the perspective of a lender, when they're looking out 30 years, then they have to take into account the risk of lending money. And so when inflation is higher, especially if it's expected to be higher than it was 6 or 12 months ago, then that's additional risk they're taking on. So you see higher interest rates as a result of that. So as long as inflation remains elevated or above where the Fed wants it to be, which it currently is, that's going to make it more challenging for rates to come down. Having said that, I think rates have peaked, so going forward we will begin to see them taper, but not significantly in 2026.
So let's, to kind of wrap this up, Joey, I'm going to ask you, what are the two things, or maybe three things from your recent research that causes you concern, and what are three things that create optimism for you as we go forward into next year?
I think the biggest cause for concern, or the biggest challenge we face, is going back to affordability, which is largely driven by the lack of housing supply. So I think as we look forward, it's very important for everyone to realize that improving or increasing the housing supply in South Carolina, that's how we're going to get a handle on these affordability concerns in the long run. So that needs to be a priority for South Carolina at the state and the local levels. But we are very optimistic going forward about our state, particularly with our economy as a whole and for the housing industry. So as we look ahead towards 2027, we're expecting continued positive growth, again, fairly weak growth, because we do have those headwinds of inflation as well as higher mortgage interest rates, but very strong demand drivers as well. So again, we're optimistic about slow and steady growth carrying us forward into 2027.
is insurance on your radar in terms of affordability and how that may impact affordability?
That is definitely another factor. We are seeing a phenomenon of people. There's a term that's going around called halfbacks, which you may have heard that. It's people who are.
I may have heard that once or twice.
People moving in from. For those who don't know, it's people who are moving south largely from New England, and they're moving south largely to retire, and they're moving to Florida. And then they're moving halfway back to the Carolinas and South Carolina especially, and that's because of costs being higher in Florida, largely driven by rising insurance costs. So Florida is really the central point of where we're seeing that happening. It's happening to a lesser extent in South Carolina, so that's a concern going forward that we're tracking.
Absolutely. Well, I think my takeaway from this is that South Carolina continues to move forward. Continues to lead in a lot of these economic areas that I think are vital to the success of our members, and I see South Carolina continuing to prosper. You know, we'll have a new governor in January, and I'm sure somebody tracks, you know, what happens when a new governor comes into office. But any impact do you think the governor's race will have on South Carolina's economy?
On the economy as a whole, I would say no. We're in pretty good shape. I think as we look forward, in election years there is a bit more uncertainty just in general, but given the high levels of economic uncertainty that we're seeing already, I don't think that introduces any real new elements. So overall, for the state's economy, we again are still in pretty good shape. We've seen a very resilient economy in 2026, so we're cautiously optimistic as we look ahead to the new year.
That's great. Well, Joey, thank you again for joining me today. Realtors, take this data, take this information, and use it to become the local market expert. Become the local trusted advisor. And the only way you can do that is by investing in your own professionalism, and you've got to know this data. This data is important, not just for your business planning, but how you interact with your clients and customers, and what it means for your business in the future. All of this adds up to increasing your professionalism and becoming the trusted advisor in your local market. So, Mike, I think we're going to wrap things up for today, and look forward, Realtors, to catching up with you again real soon. Take care, and we will see you next time.